All right, they're giving me the green light from the back, so. Yeah, I know. I hope my shirt. Well. Yeah. Yeah, I hope this shade of orange isn't too offensive for anybody today. Well, it was a toss-up between this and the USF green, but decided to go with the orange today. All right, welcome back. We are in Proverbs 19 through 21 today, so only have a couple more weeks of our study left. I hope it's been useful to you. Forgive me if my voice gives out today or if I'm actually end a little bit short. I've had a bad allergic reaction this week, and I'm trying to get through that. Give those to you. I found out I am very allergic to wasps this week. So if you know any good exterminators, send them my way. Got some work for them. Yeah, Tony. Where's Tony? I need to talk to him after church today. Yeah, that was not fun. Not what I anticipated. All right. So if you've been with us for the whole time, you know we've been looking at different sections of the Proverbs, trying to get a sense of the major themes of Proverbs, how the different sections of the book break up. So from chapters 10 through really next week, the middle of 22, we will finish up the Proverbs of Solomon. I should say we'll finish up the first part of the Proverbs of Solomon. You'll notice that there's a break between chapter 22 and verse 16, and then the end of chapter 24. That section is known as the sayings of the wise, or the 30 sayings. We'll talk about that next week when we get to it. But today is one of our last sections looking at just the Proverbs of Solomon until we get to that second break. And as we've said, with these particular Proverbs, they're a little bit difficult to outline. They don't follow the same sort of organization as the Discourse on Wisdom in the beginning. This will be especially true in chapter 20. So I'm interested to see what sort of things you came across in your study or what sort of things you might have made notes of. But we're going to pick up in chapter 19, read a few passages, and then try to pull out maybe some major themes from each of these three chapters. Proverbs 19, beginning in verse 1. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than he who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Also, it's not good for a person to be without knowledge, and he who hurries his footsteps errs. The foolishness of man ruins his way, and his heart rages against the Lord. Wealth adds many friends, but a poor man is separated from his friend. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who tells lies will not escape. Many will seek the favor of a generous man, and every man is a friend to him who gives gifts. All the brothers of a poor man despise him, or the New American Standard says hate him. How much more do his friends abandon him? He pursues them with words, but they're gone. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. He who keeps understanding will find good, or find good things. But that's just sort of a taste of the first few verses of this chapter in Proverbs. The first major theme that we see in Proverbs chapter 19, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but increasingly as we get towards the end of these Proverbs of Solomon, he has a lot more to say about the poor, or poverty in general, contrasting poverty and wealth. And one of the things we saw in the Discourse on Solomon, he discouraged us from becoming poor or falling into poverty through our own hands, our own wickedness or laziness or foolishness. But he seems to have maybe mixed reception of poverty later on, that there are certain cases in which it might be better for one to be poor and yet to be righteous than for someone to have great wealth and to come by that wealth by illicit gains. But I've put all the different verses here in chapter 19 where he talks about riches and poverty. So some of these that I just read in verse 1. Better is a poor man who walks in integrity than a perverse person, or one who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Verse 4, wealth adds many friends, but a poor man is separated from his friends. Verse 7, all the brothers of a poor man hate or despise him. How much more do his friends abandon him? Verse 10, it says, luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a slave to rule over princes. Verse 14, homes and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Verse 17, one who is gracious to a poor man lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deeds. And then finally, verse 22, what is desirable in a man is his kindness, and it is better to be a poor man than a liar. This is a pretty unusual concentration of a particular theme in one of these late chapters, because they are so sort of sporadic. What did you glean from these readings and meditations on poverty and wealth? Why do you suppose he has so much to say here about poverty and wealth?
Well, I mean, kind of throughout the word, there's a lot of discussion of poor, taking care of the poor, being poor. And I guess I've always looked at it both ways. It's not just we think of it in our Western culture as it has to do with money. And I guess I always, in my mind, think of it as poor in spirit, poor in, you like I said, the like mental health issues we might say today, and all. It's not just no money, but I think it's just like a lot of the word. It's almost flip-flops, but the real gist is it's not bad to be poor. It's not always your fault if you're poor. Yeah. But if you are, expect this: you're not going to be treated like those are. And we sometimes can get offended even when we're poor, not necessarily money, but some Christians. There's a lot of Christians in politics that complain about being persecuted. Well, isn't that a good thing? That's what it says in here. But we complain about it, so we're not. To me, I guess I'm saying it's more warning of acting like you're surprised. You should expect this. We're in God. If we're poor, we'll get through it. But it's going to be easier for other people. Don't blame them. Just keep moving.
Yeah, good. Any other reflections here? This was by far the most prominent theme, the topic of wealth or poverty in this particular chapter. Yes, sir.
Just don't ever look down on the poor, because, like I said, you never know how the circumstance of life, it can always flip. It reminds me of a cartoon I watched, the X-Men, Wolverine told the Juggernaut, money and his food will soon depart. And so, quick as you have it, quick as you can lose those things. So don't never look down on the poor in your situation, and Jesus said in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, let me see, Lord. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so he's making a contrast to physical and spiritual, So Solomon, like I said, he was rich. First he started out, he prayed for wisdom and how to rule God's kingdom, and God blessed him with riches, But first he asked for that wisdom, how to rule and how to direct the people of God. But God gave him extra. But like I say, but you see how he misused it later in his life, those things. So it's a blessing and it's a curse if you don't use it wisely.
Yeah, good. Great application with X-Men too. It's always good to fit a reference like that, because for some people it might be more memorable if they're familiar with something in that context. Any other reflections? Yes, Cindy?
I'm so sorry. It goes back and forth. Like, it's prosperous to be poor because then you're not stupid. But then it's bad to be poor because everybody hates you. And it just goes, if you just kind of I was highlighting just back and forth, every other verse is an exact opposite of the previous verse. So I guess to be wealthy without reason, judgment, prudence, and love is horrible, I think. than to be poor. Even if you don't have money, you can still be wise with what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's an odd back and forth.
It is. It's really good you point that out, because it goes back to something we mentioned in the beginning of the class. It's important not to isolate any one of these proverbs as like, this is the one statement about wealth in the Proverbs, or a statement about poverty. And we talked about this in relation to the reward for doing right. Sometimes we do the right thing and we don't receive the reward that we think we're owed. And sometimes the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. And this is something that Proverbs addresses in as much as it encourages us to do good and to show that good things can follow from doing good. I think, for my 2 cents, the Proverbs writer is trying to capture this whole vast array of human experience, where sometimes it's better for us to be poor, not through our own laziness or wickedness, but just this is the lot that we have in life, and God can still use us. But also, God can use those who have great means to do good things and to be good stewards. And so for me, I think that's the value of reading the whole book together, is when we notice, it seems like he's going back and forth. He's using poverty in a positive sense, in some cases in a negative sense in others. Another thing, this came up also in chapter 17, but he talks about children, and that children are reflect on the legacy of their parents. Look here in chapter 19 and verse 13. A foolish son is a destruction to his father, and the contentions of a wife are a constant dripping. Verse 18. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his health. Verse 26. He who assaults his father and drives his mother away is shameful and disgraceful. Cease listening, my son, to discipline, and you will stray from words of knowledge. A rascally witness makes a mockery of justice, and the mouth of the wicked spreads iniquity. There is this concern in the last couple of chapters about the way children take on the legacy of their parents. And we mentioned last week that certain actions we take can both honor our ancestors or descendants, or conversely, they can bring shame to our ancestors, and then they can certain actions we take can make the road for our descendants much more difficult. Yes, ma'am.
My version's very different.
Okay.
So I just want to, check. Chapter 19, verse 18. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. And did you say health?
I probably did, but mine says desire his death as well. So I just
Okay.
misread that.
Okay.
I just can't read. That's a me problem. Sorry about that. Yeah, good correction there. Sorry if I said that incorrectly. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. That's a major difference. Not desiring his death versus desiring his health. Yes, sir. Mr. Hugh.
It's interesting that sometimes when you're reading different people in the Bible, you can almost tell the mood they're in. Like Solomon said, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Then later he said, it is better to live in a corner of the housetop than have a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. And then he said later, it is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. So here he is writing these proverbs, and you think some things are going on that make him go, oh, a wife is such a treasure. And then later, he says something that contradicts what he said earlier. So it's almost like you can get an insight into where was he, what was bothering him at the time when you read some of these proverbs.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I don't even know necessarily that there's a contradiction there between saying he who finds a wife finds a good thing, and then this passage here in verse 13, and it comes up again, a very similar reference here in chapter 20, and then in chapter 22, about living with a contentious wife or spouse. He's probably just it's kind of humorous to us to see this picture, but he's trying as best he can to capture, like visually capture, the pain or the discord of living with someone who is contentious like this.
We also have 700 wives.
Yeah, so he could have been talking, wife 400 was the pleasant wife, and then wife 672 was the contentious wife. You never know. But that's a good observation. I think this is a really special verse. Something to reflect on back in verse 3. The foolishness of man ruins his way, and his heart rages against the Lord. What might that mean, and why do you think that, even for a fairly aphoristic book, this seems like a peculiar verse? What might this mean? What's that? Following the flesh? Yeah, so the foolishness of man would be equivalent to pursuing the lust of the flesh.
I think of it too. Folly is carelessness. We can be doing a lot of the right things, but if we're careless about others or even about the right thing, we may not think it because we're kind of going through the motions, but we're being careless about God, about God's word or God's people, and that we think there's throughout history a lot of people in the name of religion or in faith have gone against God, but they've just kind of hijacked it or been misled, and that's just the heart rages against the Lord. I think we if we're not continually checking and kind of fact-checking ourselves or fact-checking our faith, that I think we talked last week, or maybe it was Wednesday, some about how do we know if we're doing God's will. Is it how you feel? Is it what it says in the, there's a lot of, it's not like a black and white. There's a lot of gray, so we need to always be kind of looking at the heart of God and seeing what we're doing. And when we are careless and don't do that, it's like raging against the Lord.
Yeah. I just think that language is so strong. I mean, I can't really think of times when my heart raged against someone. Like, I was so upset. Some guy cuts me off in traffic. I'd be like irritated, but I wouldn't say that my heart rages against that person. Or my heart rages against my parents, or, it's such a strong statement here. I see you have a comment, and I'll finish what I was saying.
It makes me think back Solomon speaking of himself when God told him not to, marry outside, and he went against God, and God, hated that he did that, and that started, later on it started to cause the fall of Solomon's his leadership, because first, like I say, he prayed that God would give him wisdom to rule his people, but then he turned around and went against God, and married those strange women, which turned his heart against God, and he started building the ashes and worshiping other gods, and so that angered God. So when we do things totally against God's word, it angers God. But God, do now, we have repentance, and when God saw a work of repentance, but that angered God. I think, to me, it's like Solomon, he's reflecting back on a bad decision he made in life.
Yeah, I think we talked early on about how in the ancient world, ancient peoples viewed the heart not just as like the seat of emotions. We talk about a conflict between the head and the heart. But here, the heart is where the thinking comes, where intention comes, where we feel, where we plan. And so for the heart to turn away from the Lord, much less to rage against the Lord, is to run in the complete opposite direction. And that's what happens when we act out our own foolishness. We don't just bring ruin on ourselves, but it says the heart rages against God. One of my favorite early Christian writers who was reflecting on this particular passage is Augustine, or if you're from Florida, I guess you call him Augustine, right? But Augustine said this. He said, "Grace is not bestowed according to human merits, otherwise grace would no longer be grace. For grace is so designated because it is given gratuitously. And his thought is, only God can be perfectly good if we, his creation, could rage against him in our hearts and he would still bestow grace upon us. And that, to me, that's just a beautiful reflection on this particular verse. Yeah, I've thought a lot about this verse this week. So, anything else from 19 that you had before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I missed, somebody else said this, but raging, maybe you don't think you're raging against God, but you could be not doing his will or have hatred for another person or something, and you think, well, I still love God, but your actions show differently that would be raging against God because you're doing something so against his will, even though you don't really think of it like that at the time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the point is, in our own foolishness, we don't even know that our failure to obey God is a form of us raging against him. We just maybe take it lightly. And the point here is how good is God that God knows that when we do wrong, when we sin, we act against our self-interest, but we also, our hearts are turned against him, and yet he would still bestow grace on us. To me, it's just a very powerful thought. I want to pick up with a couple things here in chapter 20. This, to me, is the most random of all of the Proverbs of Solomon. And you see that even if, I looked at a couple different commentaries in preparing, and it's really difficult. Let's just read the first few verses. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler. Whoever is intoxicated is not wise. The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. Keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. I think other translations will say something like, fools are quick to run to a quarrel. The sluggard does not plow after the autumn, so he begs during the harvest and has nothing. A plan in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. Many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? A righteous man who walks in integrity. How blessed are his sons after him. A king who sits on a throne of justice disperses all evil with his eyes. Who can say, I have cleansed my heart, I am pure from my sins? So just up to that point, he's talked about a lot of different things. You might be able to sort of tie them together. One thing, just in the overall chapter, is the theme of trustworthiness. We've seen this a little bit before, the merits of being a trustworthy person. Look at verse 28. That's the wrong passage. Loyalty and truth preserve the king, and he upholds his throne by righteousness. We saw last week, I think in 16 and 17, there were specific sections of those Proverbs that seemed like they were written with instructions just for kings. And I'm wondering again if this is written by Solomon, a king himself. You think of how few people he probably had in his life that he could really trust. Because if you have that much power, people either want power from you, they want what they can get from you, or they'll tell you anything that you want to hear. How few people do you think that Solomon had in his life that he could really trust, had his own best interest? I don't know. Any thoughts on that, on the significance of trustworthiness, at least in this early part of the chapter? Yes, sir.
This is a question more than anything else. How is it, he's saying a lot of different things, and when I was going through it, I found there was different themes, love of the Lord and wisdom and foolishness. But when he's writing about this, they're all interspersed, it means if you just wrote, I'm going to write about love, but now I'm going to take it and I'm just going to throw those out into different spots. And then I'm going to write about wisdom, and then I'm going to throw that out in some different thoughts. Do you know why it's this way? Is this like a daily diary that just how he's feeling today, or why is it, the Bible has real meaning, so why are they dispersed the way they are here for such a wise king?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, this category of ancient proverbs, like as a genre of literature, was often just compiled sayings. But we saw that that's not how this whole book is. Like the first half of Proverbs reads like a letter from a father to a son. And so it doesn't seem like it's just sort of randomly interspersed nuggets of wisdom. But this latter portion of the Proverbs of Solomon certainly looks more like other types of ancient wisdom literature you would see where they've taken sayings and compiled them. So I'm not sure how long it took Solomon to compile these, or if he's sitting down and writing these in just a few days or a short period. It's a good question. I do think it's interesting. I didn't put this on the board, but he says in verse 6, many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? Like, people will tell you how trustworthy and reliable they are. Well, anybody can say that, but how do you know if somebody's trustworthy and reliable? You look at their track record, or you have some experience with them. Notice in verse 9, similarly, who can say, I have cleansed my heart, I am pure from my sin? Everyone thinks they are the good guy, right? Who knows? Who knows our hearts? Oftentimes it's not us. Jeremiah mentions this, I think, in Jeremiah 17, or it's in chapter 9 or chapter 17. I'm not sure why, I can't remember. But he says, the heart is desperately sick. Who can find it out? Who knows the heart? Often it's not us. And notice this, moving on, he talks about the human spirit is the lamp of the Lord, searching the innermost parts, or the New American Standard says, searching all of the innermost parts of his being. The spirit of a man is a lamp of the Lord. What might that mean?
Well, I think it means it lights our way when we have, our human spirit. I guess good or bad is going to guide us. We're going to follow the light, so to speak, and so it's kind of our kind of at our core, I guess you'd say. It guides our direction like a compass or something. But I think there's so much in these. I've always assumed, and I haven't done any research on it really, but these have all been compiled by man much later. The Old Testament isn't like one huge book like it is to us now. So I mean, I think we tend to think of, I guess because of just our human nature, the Bible is like, and we say it's not true, but we do. I think most of us really think that way a lot. It's a list of rules, and if we follow them, we're fine. But of course, as we read these, it's just stating facts. There's facts about when you're poor. There's facts about kings. There's facts about lies. I mean, it's not always telling us to do something. It's not telling us to strive to be a king so you can do good or bad. It's just saying, it's this way. And if a king can be fierce, and some of these analogies are not as common to us as they were back when they were written, when people were living in kingdoms and under most people were poor. They didn't read, so it was more in, like I know when you see some of the, in a lot of places, but like in The Chosen, they show when the apostles are like waking up in the morning and they're all reciting their prayers, so they've memorized. These are ways you can memorize. They're written in ways that you can memorize them versus us. We're used to reading a novel or a book, something that's got a beginning and an end. And they like recited these certain things every morning and every night. And that's more how people read things back then and everything, and learned things, I think.
Yeah. There's some really powerful and memorable ones in here. I thought of, in verse 13, I thought of my daughter. Every Saturday morning at 6 a.m., she would say, "Do not love sleep or you will become poor. Open your eyes and you will be satisfied with food." Doesn't matter what time she goes to bed. She is awake the same time and ready to play and ready to eat breakfast. But Saturday morning, that verse hits a little harder, right? Or this one is memorable too. "Bread obtained by falsehood is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth will be filled with gravel." So there might be a time where some sort of gain comes about illicitly, but in the end, it will come back to bite you. An inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be a blessing at the end. Do not say, "I will repay evil." Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. We've seen this a couple of times already, but here he mentions it maybe 2 or 3 times about differing weights or measures. Differing weights and differing measures, both of them are an abomination to the Lord. Verse 23, differing weights are an abomination to the Lord, and a false scale is not good. Why do you think he's talking about scales and weights here?
It was so important to somebody's livelihood back then to have things be very exactly weighed and measured, and so it's kind of a metaphor for a measure of your own human worth, measure of your own worth. Are you a good person? So, but back to the previous one, though, I was just wondering if maybe it could mean the human spirit is a lamp of the Lord. Maybe it means whatever our spirit is, that shows the kind of person we are to the Lord. And he knows us by that. He doesn't know us by our outward appearance, or he doesn't care about that. So it's our spirit, and that's how he knows us, even the most innermost parts that we might not even be aware of.
I think that's right. Yeah. I get the image here of, this is a true story. Last time I was in the Tampa airport, I saw a guy put his suitcase on the scale at the check-in, and he rested his foot like this underneath the corner of his bag to take some weight off of it. And I was like, at first I was like, that's ingenious, you know? But think about it in situations where, somebody's livelihood depends on having a certain weight or amount of grain. And someone is, putting their foot on the scales, or they've got it adjusted in such a way that the outcome works out in their favor in the short term. This goes back, I think this is really interesting to come from a king. God, the God that we serve is impartial. He is the only one who sees all things truly as they are. And he wants us to live impartial and fair lives, to be fair and impartial in our dealings. Differing weights are an abomination to the Lord, and a false scale is not good. James talks about God as a God in whom there's no shifting shadow of turning. And I think it's good. Maybe it's the best thing in the world that the God we serve, who judges our hearts, doesn't have an adjusted scale for some people. Another one of my, if you're just a nut about 4th century Christian writers, Ambrose is another great one to read. He says, every kind of unfair action is shameful. Even in common things, false weights and unjust measures are accursed. And if fraud in the market or in the business is punished, can it seem free from reproach if found in the midst of the performance of the duties of virtue? This is in a context where he's writing to ministers in the church, some of whom he's reprimanding for being unfair in some of their dealings. And I don't know, this, no pun intended, this verse really weighs on me. If we're unfair or dishonest in small, simple things, how much more might we be dishonest in matters of virtue, those things that pertain to God? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Hi. Aren't they weighing these things and all that before they go into the temple to worship.
Yes.
So, and yeah, so need to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible perhaps to cheat the scale so that you meet the standard required for your trip to the temple in Jerusalem. It's pretty sleazy, pretty dishonest. Last couple things we'll talk about here in Proverbs 21, and then I think we'll end a little bit early. I'm just going to put these on the board. First is the image that we get in the first verse of the king's heart, like channels or streams of water in the hand of the Lord. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. The Lord turns it wherever he wishes. Every man's way is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the hearts. To do justice and righteousness is desired by the Lord more than sacrifice. Haughty or proud eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, this is sin. The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes to poverty. Look here at, secondly, the portrayal of the wicked in this chapter. Verses 7 through 10, the violence of the wicked will drag them away, but they refuse to act with justice. The way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. There's another one of these memorable verses I'm sure you would give to your spouse on Valentine's Day. It's better to live on the corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no favor in his eyes. Notice this, when the scoffer is punished, the naive becomes wise. But when the wise is instructed, he receives knowledge. We saw that all the way back in Proverbs 9. It said, give instruction to a wise man and he will still be wiser. Teach a learned man and he'll increase his knowledge. But if you try to reprimand a fool, he won't understand. He won't appreciate it in the same way. And then finally, something that's been a constant refrain from the very beginning is the word diligence. We said diligence might even be a good supplement for the word faith or replacement for the word faith, because we don't see the word faith nearly as much in the Old Testament. It says, the plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. And I think we could reflect on this next time we come back. There's a contrast here between diligence and haste. So what might the relationship be between patience and diligence? We thought recently about the relationship between hope and desire, right? We are all desiring whatever food is being cooked in there that you all can smell. I can't smell it. But is it right for us to hope for those things as well? We said hope is desire coupled with the belief that we will receive those things that we desire. So similarly, we want to think about the relationship between diligence and patience, because we'll see diligence again. Whoops.
Hey, Chet.
Yes.
That one kind of reminds me of those people on Jeopardy who ring in before the question is completed and they answer totally off base because they didn't let the question finish. Those people are in haste, but it ends in poverty.
Yeah, you're right. I think also Jeopardy is a good example. I think of the Family Feud people. It's like, name your favorite drink with lunch, and someone goes hamburger. And the whole family goes, good answer, right? If only they'd waited a couple more seconds to really process it, it might not have been so embarrassing. This is the last verse I wanted to leave you with today. Verses 16 and 17. A man who wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the company or assembly of the dead. He who loves pleasure will become a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not become rich. The wicked is a ransom for the righteous, and the treacherous is in the place of the upright. I love this verse as well. We'll close with this. Verse 31. The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. Reminds me of Psalm, I think it's 20 and verse 7. Some trust in horses and some trust in chariots, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. And that's how that passage finishes there. So next week we're going to conclude the Proverbs of Solomon, this portion, and then pick up with the sayings of the wise. And then after next week we'll go back to the second part of Solomon's Proverbs and then start to wrap things up. So I appreciate you being here. Let's have a word of prayer and give thanks for the food, I suppose. Or maybe we'll do that in there, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for the time we have to be together today and for the encouragement we get from one another and from reading these Proverbs. I ask that you would go with us to keep us from sin. Help us to be mindful of your promises and your commandments, and bless our time of fellowship together in this meal. In Christ we pray. Amen.